Ready, set, and go. Okay, hello. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to Psychology 150. Hope everybody online is doing well. Hope everybody here in class is doing well. We can get started now. Torrance is here. We weren't going to get started, but since he's shown up, we're now ready to go. If you're visiting us online and you're in the seated class, please go ahead and type hello in the chat bar and let me know you're here. If you're in my online class and want to type in the chat bar, that's completely fine too. Only you don't need to do that to get credit. Looks like we've got Bradley, Kayla, Sarah, Landon's here. Wow, sounds like a good crowd. Thanks everybody for coming. Elizabeth, thank you for coming. Everybody have a good weekend. I'd like to welcome Bradley back from the beach. He had a great beach vacation this weekend. The weather was absolutely perfect, so he said. Did anybody else do something fun this weekend? Anybody online do something fun this weekend? Anybody? What'd you do, Isabella?
I took this water safety instructor class, which is basically learning how to teach people how to swim.
Cool, okay, nice. Are you a big time swimmer?
Well, I work at a pool, so.
Oh, so it would be helpful, right? Okay, cool, I get that. Nice. Anybody else do something fun? That's it. Holy cow, it's summer, folks. You're supposed to be doing some fun stuff here. I actually went to the mountains and drove on the parkway. It was very, very nice. Let's see. Nobody online did anything interesting. Well, that's on you. All right, so a couple of quick announcements before we get started. You know I've offered you rewrites for writing assignment 1 and writing assignment 2. I'm going to close out the rewrites on those this Sunday. So if you have an edit outstanding, you need to get that document on writing assignment 1 or 2. You need to get that document in as soon as possible. I will not accept them after Saturday on Sunday, July 2nd. Writing assignment 3, wow, a bunch of you turned in writing assignment 3, so I've got an awful lot of work to do this week, which is very exciting for me. Online students, you had to wait until last week, so I'm going to grade the online students' papers first this week. You students in the seated class, you're at the back of the line this week, so I'll have writing assignment 3 graded sometime by Friday or Saturday at the latest. Everybody who turned in homework last night, I went ahead and stayed up really late and graded your short answer questions on the writing assignments that we did last night, your memory tricks. How are you going to improve your memory? So I stayed up and graded those. Remember, if you didn't get 95% accuracy, you need to go back and redo that assignment so that you get 95% accuracy. And that goes for the same on all of your assignments so far. Don't forget, we've got the webinar this week as usual. We're moving back to Thursday this week from the Wednesday. Last week was just Wednesday for 1 week. We're going back to Thursday for this week, and I hope everybody comes and hangs out with me on webinar. Do we have any questions online? Do we have any questions in class? Okay, shall we go ahead and get started? Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. How does that sound? Okay, so this week's module is Born That Way, and it's a question mark, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to ask the question, you people sitting in front of me, you online students sitting at home, were you born that way? Or did something in your environment create the kind of person you are? Remember, we've talked about it so far this semester a couple of times, nature versus nurture. We're going to revisit that question today as we talk about developmental psychology, which is the branch of psychology that is interested in human change. And then we're also going to talk about behaviorism, which is another branch of psychology that is also interested in change. I believe those are chapters 6 and 9 in your online textbook this week. Oh, Maya, I saw you came in. I didn't even see you. Hello, how you doing? Cool, thank you very much for coming. All right, cool. So before we get started, you know, I've talked to you this semester a few times about data and how important data is to our approach as a science. We're not philosophers, we're science, and that's because we make observations, we collect data, and we demonstrate and show these data. In fact, this week's writing assignment, again, will focus on your knowledge about data gathering sources, how we do it, and what kinds of conclusions you can make based upon those. So what I'd like to do is to show you a short video data visualization, if you don't mind. For those students who are the online students, I'm going to send you a link to this right now. And you can watch it online. It's going to take about 4 minutes, and then we're going to come back, if you don't mind, and talk about it. So I'm going to send it to you right now. Hopefully you folks see the video that I've sent through to you. Yes, I'll see you folks in about 4 minutes while we here at the home office watch this video. All right? Okay, fantastic. They're like that, we're like this. Let's go ahead and watch this.
Visualization is right at the heart of my own work too. I teach global health. And I know having the data is not enough. I have to show it in ways people both enjoy and understand. Now, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Animating the data in real space, with a bit of technical assistance from the crew.
So, here we go. First, an axis for health, life expectancy, from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth, income per person, $400, $4,000, and $40,000. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe! And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up. Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, but there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai. It has the same wealth and health as Italy today. And there is the poor inland province Guizhou. It is like Pakistan. And if I split it further, the rural parts are like Ghana in Africa.
And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
Well, what you just seen in the last few minutes is a story of 200 countries shown over 200 years and beyond. It involved plotting of 120,000 numbers. Pretty neat, huh?
Okay. All right, fantastic. We are back. So, what did that data visualization show us about lifespan and other factors? Can somebody tell me? Anybody at home, what did you notice from that demonstration about lifespans and money?
Seems like the more money you have, the longer you live generally.
Right. What kind of research study was this? Was this a case study? Was this an experiment? Was this a correlational study? Was it an observational study? What do you think it was? It was an observational study, yes, but what were they doing, statistically speaking? They were looking at a correlation. Absolutely. Right. So here's the thing. What do we know about correlation? Does money does money cause wealth? What do you think caused the increase in health? Yeah. The Industrial Revolution, yes, you're going along the right way. What else? Better knowledge, better resources, better knowledge about health and wellness. Absolutely. All right, so that long twisted point that I was trying to make is that one of the things that developmental psychology is interested in, one of the things I'm going to ask you to be interested in is this idea of the lifespan development perspective. One of the things I told you psychology can do is to help you lead a healthier, happier life. One of the areas that is acutely focused on this idea of health and wellness is the lifespan developmental perspective, chapter 9 of this textbook. And lifespan development is a multidisciplinary group of people who are interested in trying to figure out how best human beings can live and grow. Now, although you're going to find developmental psychology taught in the psychology department, it is multidisciplinary. There are sociologists, there are anthropologists, there are doctors, geneticists, all kinds of people are interested in the factors that help people lead healthier, happier lives. And I don't know if you knew this, but the average lifespan, that is the age at which half of your classmates would be dead, in 1900 was 47 years old. That meant that by the time you got to 47 years, half of the people you knew in high school were already dead. The average lifespan right now is in the 70s, and there are some places in the world where they have the right diet and lifestyle are going to average lifespans in the 90s. And that's all because of this developmental perspective. But you know what? It's not just about living a long time. It's also about well-being, which is your ability not only to live a long time, but to be productive and happy. And you know, one of the things I'd like for you folks to look at, there is a study which has followed, it's a longitudinal study. That means it follows people over the course of a lifetime. The Harvard Longitudinal Study of Human Development is the longest developmental study in history. They've been following guys for, what is it now, 75 years. And they met these people 75 years ago, and every couple of years they follow up with these people. They do CAT scans, they do medical tests, they do questionnaires and evaluations. And the idea is they want to figure out what are the qualities that the people who live the longest have. So I invite all of you to watch this short video about the Harvard Human Developmental Study. Okay? Now, so this idea of living a healthy life actually starts before you're even born, and developmental psychology tests are all going to talk about healthy living. One of the places where we've learned the most about health outcomes is in prenatal care, how to take care of a baby before it's born. At that point, the baby is developing, it's just beginning. That is where the baby is most prone to damage from outside forces. Now, when you may say, well, this is ridiculous. They've always cared about this. My mom tells this story. I was born in 1969, and when she would go in and meet with her OBGYN and have an appointment while she was pregnant, he would do the well baby check, and then they would share a cigarette. They would actually smoke together in the examination room in 1960. In the 1960s, they didn't have infant formula like they did now. What they would do is they would take milk and mix a little bit of sugar in with it. That was formula back in the day. So all of these things we've learned have helped us have healthier, happier babies. So one of the ways they talk about that is in this idea of prenatal development. Now, teratogens are any kind of thing that can penetrate the maternal blood barrier and affect your baby's development. Prescription medication, illicit drugs, alcohol, carcinogens, and what they do is they penetrate the maternal blood barrier and can get into the baby's system. What determines the amount of the pterogen? They talk about dose, genetic susceptibility. So not all babies, my mom smoked and nothing happened to me, right? I turned out completely normal. So how come all babies that are not exposed to teratogens turn up sick? And it depends on the dose, the genetic susceptibility. And one thing I really want to focus on is this idea of timing. In the developmental perspective, one of the things that we're going to talk about is critical periods. Critical periods are very important in developmental psychology. One of the things that we've learned about, there are times when your developing brain and nervous system are most sensitive to environmental stimulation, either good or bad. And we're going to talk about lots of different critical periods over the next couple of days. The first critical period that you have is between 2 and 10 weeks of your life. If you look at this chart up here, you'll notice we have the bars here. This represents the prenatal development from the time of conception all the way in the germinal period, where the fertilized egg implants in the uterine wall right about here, and the neural tube begins to develop, all the way until the baby is born at 40 weeks. Okay, and so what you're going to notice is that all of the organs of the baby, these lines right here represent when the baby's organs begin developing. And your baby is going to go from a ball of cells that you can't recognize at 2 weeks to within 10 weeks, it's going to look like a teeny tiny humanoid. It's going to have little arms and little legs. It's going to have a heart, lungs. It's going to have all the structures. They're not going to be done yet, but they will have started. We refer to this as organogenesis, all right? And this happens during the embryonic period. Now at 10 weeks, the baby, we start calling the baby a fetus, and it's really about the baby growing bigger, all of the systems maturing. Now what you'll notice is the system is most sensitive. Right here, this is a critical period when this system is most sensitive to teratogenic substances. But this purple line tells you how long the system needs until it's mature. So what you're going to see is that your heart begins developing in the 3rd week, and by the 10th week, your heart is pretty much finished. It's going to have to get bigger, but it's finished. Your nervous system begins developing at 2 weeks of gestation, and your nervous system is not finished at birth. It's not finished until you're 25 years old. However, the critical period is from that 2 to 10 weeks. And so when you talk about the effect that teratogens can have, it depends on the dose, the amount you take, your genetic susceptibility, and also when their teratogen is given, you're exposed to the teratogen. So teratogen exposure during here can lead to deformation of organs. There was this drug called thalidomide. Anybody ever heard of thalidomide? It was a drug they used in the 60s in England for morning sickness. Briefly, what they didn't know, it was absolutely a horrible teratogen, and it would stop that body part for growing at whatever point. So if the baby was born, the baby might grow arms but no hands. The baby might just grow 2 hands growing out of their shoulders. And basically it created structural defects in the baby's body. And that's because these mothers were being exposed to this teratogen during this particular period. Yes, sir?
And that was an anti-androgen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and from what I understand, I don't think it was on the market for more than a few months. Okay, great question. Good point. Any other comments online? Anybody online have anything to say? So one of the things that is important is this idea of critical periods. And if you think about it, a critical period is sort of a biological construction. It's a genetically determined point in your development when something, when environmental stimulation, hey, what's up, can have good or bad effects. Now, one of the other things we know about in looking at nervous systems is that your nervous system is going to change as you mature in age. This is a maturational process we're going to talk about. But what happens to a brain as it matures, as it grows, is that it myelinates. All right? So when you're born, human beings are extremely helpless. Compared to most other animals, we are super duper helpless. Anybody here ever raised on a farm? Anybody ever been on a farm before? Seen a little colt or a chicken or something get born, and 5 and 6 minutes later, it's running around the farm just like it's always been there. Not so much for human beings, right? Because of the complexity of our function in our brain comes, if you will, incomplete. That's why your brain is not done until you're 25 years of age. What is the structural change that happens in the brain as you mature? It's the growth of this myelin tissue. That's the main thing that puts on most of the weight in your brain. It's the growth of this fatty tissue around the axons of your larger neurons. Now, it looks something like this right here. Let me go ahead and show this to the class at home. So this is the cross section of an axon. Remember those axon or those long root-like structures? This is like one that's been cut. And do you notice how it appears to be wrapped in cellophane right here? It's got these layers wrapped around it. That's myelin tissue, and that is the part of your brain that comes mostly after you are born. It's what we would call a postnatal development, right? And so what you're going to notice is that as different parts of the brain begin to myelinate, the baby will begin to engage in functions controlled by that part of the brain. All right, now, the way brains myelinate is they start at the back and they myelinate towards the front. So your visual system, your baby's visual system is going to be mature by a year of age. Their depth perception may not be great, but in terms of color and clarity, it's going to be pretty much matured. Your child's ability to control their impulses and focus, this is the part of the brain that myelinates last. And this is why 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds can't sit down and shut up. You know what I'm saying, right? Exactly. That's why we have the terrible twos. You got that amygdala firing off, but that frontal lobe isn't learned how to control it yet because it's not myelinated. Exactly. Some parts of the brain do myelinate early with others, and the development of this myelination is going to lead to behaviors that are so common we can look for them as expectations. So one common milestone is that most children are going to start walking around 12 months of age. That's when kids start walking. Somewhere between 10 and 13 or 14 months, most kids are going to start cruising around. That is so common that we call that a milestone behavior. And doctors watch for that because it's a sign that your baby's brain is developing normally. Now, here's the other cool thing. Remember I talked to you about critical periods. When you stimulate a brain, the brain grows. The brain grows, okay? And so there's this concept called blooming and pruning that your textbook's going to talk about. When your brain is born, this is kind of a really cool thing. Your neurons are born in the middle of your brain. They're created. Then they migrate to the perfect part of your brain where they're supposed to go. And then they send out a root structure called an axon. And that's what happens before they're born. Now, when you play with a baby, you're activating those neurons. And when you activate those neurons, they start to grow towards one another. Just like a plant has roots, and when you water the plant, the roots start growing. Same exact thing with neurons. When you activate a neural connection, it starts to get more root-like structures. And this is called synaptic blooming. This is referred to as synaptic blooming. And what happens is when you stimulate a baby's brain, it grows all of these different pathways that it could use to control that particular behavior. But what's going to happen is over time, it's going to figure that one of those pathways works better than all the other pathways. And so then those pathways that were created that are no longer useful are actually going to die away. So what you're going to see happen in a brain over the first few years of life is as you stimulate the baby's brain, it's going to see this over-exuberant creation of synaptic connections. And then as the baby's brain matures and it decides to use some pathways rather than other pathways, the unused pathways are going to die away. Does that make sense? Now, and so whenever you go to Walmart and look at the baby toy aisle, I always used to wonder, why is a rattle called an educational toy? At 1 year of age, what you're doing is just stimulating the visual center and the acoustic center, and you're allowing the baby to connect sound and sight. They're building the pathways that connect those very important connections in their brain. So as you stimulate the brain, it's going to build these connections. And so this is why we say there's a critical period for language. Your brain has the capacity to build the connections for language, but if you don't use them, they wither away and die. Okay? So, you need stimulation during critical periods to grow the network. So really, the one thing that you can do with your baby, if you want to bring up a healthy baby, you don't need to teach them Greek, you don't need to teach them Latin, you don't need to teach them how to hit a golf ball perfectly at 1 year of age. All you really need to do to have a happy, healthy baby is to play with them. Get up in their face and talk to them, show them things, make noise. That's what you do with the baby. Some people these days think that you got to start educating your kid at 9 months of age. We're going to start exposing them to Spanish at 9 months of age. You can do that if you want, if it works for your family. But if you don't do that, that doesn't mean your child's not going to grow up to be all they can be. All you need to be doing with your baby is stimulating that brain so these neural connections can begin to grow together. Now, notice I'm using the word maturation. It's actually stated a little bit farther along. A little farther along, I'm going to mention it. But human beings change as they grow up. So, Torrance, you were born one way, this little, and you're now this big with hair and all of these other characteristics. Now, you are like you are now, and you have changed for two reasons. Number one, you've matured. Your body has genetically grown like it was supposed to. If you were an acorn, now standing in front of me is the oak tree that you were programmed to be. That's maturational change. Now, to the fact that you know calculus or algebra or plumbing or whatever you know, that wasn't something that matured in you. That was something you learned. So human beings change two ways, by learning and by maturation. This represents what we'll call the maturational change of the human nervous system. Okay? Now, I mentioned milestone behaviors. They actually use milestone behaviors in research and actually more in clinical settings to help keep an eye on healthy babies. Your brain is not done when it's born, okay? Your brain has to change, and it changes the most in the first 3 to 4 years of your life. Now, one of the things we know about the brain is this concept of neuroplasticity. If it's broke, we can reprogram the brain. But the earlier we know it's got a problem, the better our outcomes are. So neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to rewire itself. Neuroplasticity is best at an early age and gets less effective as you grow older. So with neurological problems, it's best to figure out the problem as soon as possible. Now, in order to do that, developmental psychologists use this concept of developmental milestones. This fellow named Arnold Giselle, God, almost 90 years ago, in the 1930s, came upon this insight that children pretty much around the world go through the same sort of steps together. All children, the first thing they can do is they can move their head. That's usually the first thing. All kids are born helpless. The first thing they can move is their head. Typically, the second thing they can do is flap those arms around. Typically, the third thing children can do is roll over a little bit. And he realized children go through a very set of predictable behaviors, and you can sort of measure when these behaviors should come. And he realized that you can then use these milestones to identify children who are behind. So we would expect you to be able to walk at 12 months of age. If you're 20 months and you don't have coordination and can't walk, there's a neurological problem then. The same thing with language, the same thing with social milestones. Autistic spectrum disorder, ASD, can be diagnosed using milestone behaviors. One of the normal milestones that children tend to demonstrate is the social smile. Around 4 months, children will begin to voluntarily smile. That is a normal behavior that children do. Children at this time tend to become really, really interested in human faces. They tend to like people. So we look at your child. If your child is not smiling and it is not interested in people and they're 8 months or 9 months of age, the doctor begins to wonder if there's some sort of neurological problem going on. Does everybody understand how these milestones work, right? And so when you take your baby to the doctor, I wish Olivia, you're online, not here. Olivia brought her cute little daughter in here last week, I think it was, right, Olivia? And when you take your doctor to the well baby appointment, you're going to find that your doctor always chats you up and asks you what your baby's doing. And most parents will gush on and tell the doctor everything their baby's doing. The doctor doesn't really care about your baby. What they're listening to are some milestone behaviors. Is that baby doing what they're supposed to be doing? And they're looking for different milestones. Motor skills, your baby's ability to move their body follows a progression that we know. And in fact, that's the progression that's shown right here underneath me to those of you at home. Those of you here, you'll see that scheme right here. There are cognitive milestones. We expect children to have intellectual abilities at certain age. And this week in webinar, we're actually going to do an infant evaluation on 2 children who are of different intellect, who have different developmental trajectories, and we're going to see if you can tell the difference. There's socio-emotional, and there are language milestones. So your doctor expects these behaviors to emerge. They're going to evolve. They're going to evolve just like you would expect leaves or anything else to evolve naturally on a tree as it grows. And we expect them to follow a specific pattern. If they don't, we know something's going wrong with the maturational forces in the brain, okay? And you know, one of the things, so here's the deal, just like some of you are always late to class, some children are always late on their milestones. So one of the things I talk to practitioners, they don't get bent out of shape if your child is 1 month behind or 2 months behind, or even 3 months behind. As long as your child is progressing normally, they don't seem to get bent out of shape. It's when the child stops making milestones, or sometimes like with the ASD, the child will even begin regressing in their social behavior, will begin looking like a younger and younger child. I know I've had 2 or 3 instances of people I know where the children didn't say their first word till like 18 months or 20 months, and the doctor really wasn't that bent out of shape. For some reason, they don't seem to get as bothered about the language milestones. All right, now environmental forces. Now I did talk about maturation, but environment still matters in development because there are cultural differences in when children from different cultures do meet milestones based upon what that culture focuses on. When I was a child back in the 60s, you know what you did? You put your child to bed on their stomach. The thinking was, because they're laying this way, it will force them to lift their neck. And the idea was you're helping the child strengthen their neck muscles. Would you do that today? Oh no, absolutely not. You'd be killed if you put your kid. Now it's put your baby back to sleep. And so what you're going to find is that children aren't lifting their head as early today as they did back 30, 40, 50 years ago. So there are some variations that you will see. All right. And just a quick note, remember we talked about IQ tests a couple of weeks ago. One of people's often wonder what happens to people's mind as we get older. And the thing is, your mind changes in different ways. So we have this chart right here. IQ tests measure two basic abilities. How quickly and flexibly you can think, which is your fluid intelligence. And they also measure your knowledge for facts and your ability to reason from those facts, which we'll call your crystallized intelligence. And a longitudinal research is where you look at the same people over many years. This is actually what's known as a cross-sequential research. They looked at people of different age and then followed them for a bunch of different years. And what they found is that as people get older, the real change that occurs in your brain is you just aren't as flexible or as fast as you used to think. Your knowledge for facts is still there, but you're just not as good of a critical thinker, a super fast thinker as you used to be. And that's the normal trajectory with people's cognitive abilities. So it is not normal to expect that you are going to lose your mind when you're 60 or 70. Dementia is not the normal progression. Now, having said that, I will tell you that dementia is one of the cognitive disorders that you will see later in life. People don't become demented in 18 years old, 25 years old, but 60s, 70s, 80s. Dementia can be a problem. Alzheimer's, anybody, have you folks heard of Alzheimer's? That is the most common cause of dementia that you're going to see in older age. Now, there's no way you can really prevent it. There's no magic bullets. But one of the things that I will tell you that seems to be a protective factor, exercise, exercise, exercise. Get your lazy butts up and get to the gym and lift some weights and do some cardio, right? That's what you need to do. That is a protective factor against cognitive decline. And also do something intellectual. You folks are in school right now because you're young and you're like, well, we're supposed to be in school. You know what? One day you're going to get old like me and you're going to be in your 50s and you're going to say, I'm too old to learn anything new. No, actually, you must learn something new. Actually challenging yourself, going back to school. I'm learning Spanish right now. I suck at it. I'm like on the 8-year plan. I'm absolutely no bueno, right? But I'm working on it. And that intellectual task, no matter how bad I do it, is going to serve as a protective factor. So keep your mind, and you know what they say? The research suggests that crossword puzzles and word finds aren't enough. What now? Got to do something harder. Read a book. Read a book or learn a language or play an instrument. Become a rock star. Make your first rap album. Do whatever. Do something sort of difficult and intellectually challenging and then get your butt moving at the gym. Okay. Always, every appointment. There you go. Olivia, actually, she just made a comment based on the Milestone evaluation. So every appointment she goes to the doctor does ask her and wants to know what's going on with that child. And the doctor is secretly listening for milestone behaviors. Now, some doctors actually use these paper and pencil measures. There's something called the Ages and Stages questionnaire. I took my kid to Carey Pediatrics, and of course they have a big fancy form, 12-page form you fill out and write numbers down and evaluate your kid. You can do it informally or non-formally. Thank you, Olivia. All right, 12. All right, now, here's the deal. I suggested to you that you can think of human beings as changing because of maturation, genetically programmed, or because they learn and they make a conscious decision to change. Now, developmental psychology has always been characterized by several debates about the nature of how human beings change. The one that's interesting to me is, are we a product of our nature or a product of our nurture. If you remember what I told you in the beginning of the semester, we talked about Charles Darwin and this theory of evolution, that we change and that we have this biology that is affected by shaped by environmental forces. And then we talked about with IQ testing, we talked about Francis Galton and this eugenics movement. These folks were serious naturists. They were on the side of genetics. Now, we're going to differentiate them from this group of psychologists known as the behaviorists, led by a fellow named John Watson right here. And John Watson was an extreme nurturist. In fact, if you'll read this quote right here, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, in my own specified world in which to bring them up in, and I guarantee to take any one of them at random and train him," sexist, him or her, "to become any type of specialist I might select. A doctor, a lawyer, an artist, a merchant chief, and yes, even a beggar man or thief, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and or race of his or her ancestors." This is about as environmentalist as you can get, right? And so in psychology, every time we look at a bit of human functioning, you're going to have the nurturist looking at the biology, the critical periods, the genetic factors, the neurons, and then you're going to have these nurturists saying, hey, what about the environment? So what I want to do for the next 15 minutes is introduce you to the nurturists, and then on Wednesday, we're going to talk about some developmental debates, and we'll talk about how the nurturists and natures differ in that. Okay? So, John Watson. You know, John Watson was actually super duper famous because he demonstrated that you can train a psychological problem into a human being. Remember, the eugenists thought that the reason we had crime and psychological disorders was because some people are just genetically inferior. So John Watson wanted to demonstrate with the case study that you can actually create a problem. And so what he did was he used classical conditioning to train little Albert to have a phobic reaction to little white rats and to white furry beards and to Santa Claus and into anything kind of white and furry. Okay, I invite you to watch the video. He was so sure that he was going to be able to do this that he actually filmed it back in the early 20s. It's in silent film and somebody's added a piano music to it. But this guy was so sure of what he was going to do that he created video to document this, right? Now, here's the deal. Your behaviorists are interested in learning, not maturation, but learning. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a function of environmental experience. Instincts, maturation, puberty doesn't require a specific event. Learning, so puberty is a maturational thing. Learning is changing based upon environmental experience, all right? And so the behaviorists believe that all human behavior, everything about you, from what you like to what you can do, to the language you speak, to whether or not you're a criminal or a award-winning chemist, all depends upon your environment. It's nothing to do with you, the individual. It's only your environment. They were super duper nurturers. Now, they're called the behaviorists. That was actually a nickname given to them because they thought you couldn't study the mind. You can't see inside that black box. I can't see an idea, so a true scientist doesn't study something you can't see. What can you see? I can see your behavior. I don't know if you like this lecture, William. You may not, I can't tell what's going on in your mind, but if he gets up and walks out the door and slams the door, I can tell something happened, right? And so the idea is we can only study behaviors. So they used to be called the behaviorists. They didn't study mental stuff. They just studied things that you could observe. And they did a lot of work with animals, pigeons, rats, monkeys. And like I said, they argued that your life outcomes were determined by your environment. Now, there are two methods for acquiring new behaviors, and I've getting ready to run out of time. The first is classical conditioning, learning by association. And the second is operant conditioning, learning by outcome. So here's how each and every one of you is affected by your environment. I swear to God this works, okay? There's classical conditioning, learning by association. You associate things in your environment with reflex responses that happen to you, and then those neutral cues begin to elicit the reflex that you have, all right? And then another way you learn is by rewards and punishments. You came in late, and I took 10 points off your attendance grade. I'll bet you won't do that again. You came in early and brought me an apple. I gave you 10 extra points. I'll bet you'll do that again, right? And so those are the two ways in which people change. Now, the first is called classical conditioning or reflex learning, and it was identified by this fellow named Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov was actually not a psychologist. Remember, I told you way back in early 1900s, you didn't have to be a psychologist to be a famous psychologist. He was a Russian physiologist. How good of a physiologist was he? Good enough that he won the Nobel Prize for physiology, okay? So he was a physiologist. But he realized that when he would feed these animals foods, when you give an animal food, they salivate. That's a reflex behavior. And he found that when he gave the animal food and it salivated, the animal would begin salivating to other things in the environment that it associated with the food. So here's the deal. Let me give you an example. Every Friday, I cook at my house. My wife works hard and she has a lot of hours, so I'm the chef at the house. I cook 6 nights a week. I hate it. But on Friday night, it's always pizza night. It's always pizza night because, damn it, I'm tired of cooking, right? So here's what I do. I order that Domino's pizza, and every Friday night, I hear the doorbell ring. Ding dong. The door opens. There's Danny, the pizza guy. I smell this pepperoni pizza, and I begin salivating. Now, I salivate to that pizza. That's a reflex. Salivating is a reflex behavior. Pizza smells so good, and I salivate it. The next week, the doorbell rings. Ding dong. I see Danny. He shows me that pizza. I smell that pizza, and I begin salivating to that pizza. Now, every time I smell that pizza and salivate, I see Danny. I see Danny. I see Danny. Now, I was at the convenience store the other day, and I turned around in the line, and who's standing behind me but Danny? And suddenly, I started salivating when I saw Danny. Holy cow, I experienced what you might call a classically conditioned response right there. All right. Now, what I'd like for you to do is go watch on your own a longer video which shows you the different parts of the video, the UCS, the UCR. But the point is, human beings learn by the classically conditioned associations that are in their environment. So, why is it you have this belief or you have this belief? Maybe you don't like green people. Every time green people come on TV, your dad goes, "Ew, green people," right? Green people, and that scares you, right? Because it scares you when your dad goes, "Ew." And so every time you see green people on TV, your dad goes, "Ew," and it makes you scared and cry. And after a while, whenever you see a green person on TV, guess what? Boom, you've got this classically conditioned association, all right? And so one way we learn is by associating things with reflex responses in our environment. This is how people learn to be afraid of things, All right. My grandmother, for example, she is allurophobic. Does anybody know what allurophobic is? She has a cat phobia. She hates cats. When she was a little kid, somebody took a cat. This was what they did in the country back in the 1930s for courting, I suppose. And some teenage boy grabbed a cat, dropped it down the back of her shirt, and it scratched her up. And she was very terrified. Now, every time she sees a cat, even though it's not that cat, she thinks about that scary event, and it has created this cat phobia in her. So that's one way we change. So you can think about our abilities. You can think about our predispositions, what we like, what we don't like, our culture. All of these things are classically conditioned in us, right? And the second kind of learning, And the second kind of learning is what we'll call operant conditioning, or learning by consequences. How many of you have a dog, a pet? You can't teach a cat anything. They've got their own opinion. You got a dog. How do you teach your dog to poop outside and not inside the house? What now? You give them a treat. You give them a reinforcer. You take them out there, and when it's time for them to poop, right, if they randomly do it, you give them a reward. What do you do if your dog poops in the house? You know what we used to do in the 70s? We'd take the newspaper and whack that dog's butt, right? Put their nose in the poop and whack that dog's butt. You're punishing because you don't want them to do that behavior again. If you're doing that, you're using operant conditioning to either reinforce a behavior or to punish a behavior. And what this guy B.F. Skinner found with his pigeons, all right, or rats, he used pigeons and rats, and this is what's known as a Skinner box. He would put this rat in here, and there's a little bar. And every time this rat presses a bar, it gets a food pellet. And you know what he found out? After a while, that rat will do nothing but press that food bar to get food. And he has this thing called a cumulative recorder, which he would measure how often the rat presses the bar. And what he found was that you could condition all kinds of complex behaviors. You could condition the rat to press a bar. You could condition a pigeon to peck a circle when it saw a particular color or word. And you could condition these things using positive reinforcers. And he argued, B.F. Skinner argued, that that's how we learn everything. According to him, we learn language by being positively reinforced. You know how you learn the word milk? You said the word milk, and your mom or dad gave you some milk, right? You saw the puppy dog, and you said puppy, so your parent lets you touch the puppy dog. So according to B.F. Skinner, language and everything we learned how to do. What's your favorite color? You. What's your favorite color? Blue. You know why blue is your favorite color? Okay, because Gloria, one day, she put on a blue dress when she was about 2 years old, and her uncle came up and did this on her cheek and said, "You are so adorable," and she felt so happy because he did that to her. And so the next day she put on her blue dress again, and this time another aunt saw her and said, "You are so pretty," and gave her a piece of candy. And the third time she did this, somebody else gave her a sip of some juice. And every time she put on this blue dress, she was reinforced by a reward. And after a while, when I ask you, "Hey, what's your favorite color?" you will say, "It's blue." Okay? And so what he found was that you could cause an animal to learn a behavior. And he found that you could do it two ways. You didn't even have to reinforce every behavior. Did you know that once you get your dog to learn how to poop outside or to sit or to fetch, you don't have to reinforce them every time. you can actually reinforce the behavior every second time or every third time. And he found that partial reinforcement will still train an animal. So you don't have to be given a compliment every time you wear a blue dress. Every third or fourth time will be enough to get you to like the color blue. And he found that you can reinforce behaviors using continuous reinforcement, or you can reinforce behaviors using partial reinforcement. And bizarrely enough, it turns out that behaviors that are learned with partial reinforcement tend to last longer than behaviors that are learned with continuous reinforcement. All right? Now, what I would like for you to do, folks, is to, on your own, read about the different types of reinforcers and punishers. There's more than one way to reinforce a behavior. There's what's known as a positive reinforcer, and there's what's known as a negative reinforcer. Okay? One of the things I can do to make my son get A's in high school is I could pay him $100 every time he makes an A. I didn't do that. I'm far too cheap, but I could have. You know what I'm saying? And that would be what's known as a positive reinforcer. I'm adding something positive to him. On the other hand, I was a pretty strict dad. He had to be home on school nights by 10 o'clock. That's when you had to be home on school nights in high school. I don't know if that's too ridiculous. Maybe I'm a jerk. But here's the deal. You know what I could do? I could say, if you make A's, I will let you come home whenever you want. I'll take away that negative restriction, right? And so that's what we would call negative reinforcement. So, you know what I could do? I could say that whoever does their homework and gets 100 this week doesn't have to come to class next week. And I'll bet you each and every one of you would try your best to do really good on your homework so you didn't have to come to class, right? You'd work harder than ever. That's what we would call a negative reinforcer. So here's the deal. Shaping my son's academic performance. I could give him something positive to make him do that. I could take away something negative to make him want to study hard. If he made a bad grade, I could add something negative to him, like a butt whooping. How 1970s is that? Or I could take away his cell phone, which would be a fate worse than death here in the 21st century. And I could use all of these to condition his behavior. Please watch the video on your own to learn how reinforcers and punishers work. And the final thing I will leave you with before we get out of here is this idea of shaping. The behaviorists thought you could learn anything through environmental causes. I see lots of similarities between the iPhone and Skinner's box. Oh, hold on just a second. Wow. That's an interesting point that NOCO makes. Similarities between a Skinner's box and an iPhone. You get on the iPhone, you open your Facebook or your Instagram, and if you have likes, that's like positive reinforcement. So you'll post another image, you get more likes. That's actually quite brilliant, NOCO. I think that's a great point to bring out. Now, the thing is, these behaviorists thought we could shape any kind of behavior, even the most complex behaviors. So if you've ever done something like swim or a gymnastics routine, B.F. Skinner would say that you'd learned it through shaping. Now, shaping is where we can use positive reinforcements to condition a complex behavior. What I've got for you that I'd like for you to look at is a video where a lady teaches a dog how to turn on the lights in the house, which is a pretty complex behavior for a dog. And what you're going to notice is she rewards behaviors that are similar to switching the light switch on. And then as the dog does the behavior that's similar, she reinforces that behavior. And then the dog will do something that's even a little more similar, and she reinforces that behavior. And what she does is she starts training the dog by reinforcing behaviors that are what they call successive approximations, a behavior that's sort of close to what she wants, and then she moves it along. And this lady, in about 45 attempts, teaches this dog how to run in the house, and she can say, hup, and the dog will run over to the right light switch and jump up on a chair and flick it with its nose. And she does that in about 20 minutes of training. So I'd like for you to watch that. All right? So here's the point of today's lecture. Here's the point of today's lecture. All right? Developmental psychology is that branch of psychology which is interested in how human beings change and grow. The whole point of this is to make the world such a place where you grow and have the most well-being, where you live the longest, you're the productivest, most productive and happiest. And in fact, you saw that video I showed how age has increased, average lifespan has increased. So that's the whole point of developmental psychology. Now, developmental psychologists are interested in how we change. Is it because of genetic programming, these biological forces like critical periods, myelination, dendritic blooming? Or does this change occur because of the environment? Why is Torrance the way he is? Is it because of his genes, or is it because of the environment he was brought up in? All right, and so what we're going to do on Friday is we're going to talk about some developmental theories, and we're going to talk about the evidence suggesting that we are either products of genetics or products of our environment. Does anybody have any questions before I let you go? All right, thank you very much for coming today. Have a great day. If you came in late, please make sure I got your attendance before you leave. Take care and have a great day. Thank you very much to those of you online. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me a text or an email. I look forward to seeing you next time on the broadcast. Take care and have a great day. Bye-bye. All right, hey, take care, man. I got you, dear.